you still alive?" And John looked up with a grin on his face and said, "'Cause I'm a raving lunatic."
Oh, my. But he obviously is not. There's no question that somewhere around he has sort of absorbed some of Tesla's cosmic genes after Tesla departed, because his work is just spellbinding.
But on the internet, he's written off as a lunatic, and so that he's not a threat to the system because the brain dead, can't think for themselves, and
Okay,
so
now
they don't find it.
this gets to your going over there. And did John, when you showed him this and when you talked to him about the other things, the holes in the ground especially, did he confirm your feelings that maybe this was some kind of energy-directed weapon?
Now, I don't talk about weapons. Let's
Yeah.
clarify. Let's clarify this. I
Okay.
talk about the destructive mechanism. We can rule
Okay.
out kinetic energy. Something banging on something. The building was not beaten to death, so
Right.
kinetic energy is ruled out as the
Right.
destructive mechanism. The building wasn't cooked to death, so thermal energy as the destructive mechanism is ruled out. But what we do find is that energy was directed, instructed in some way to do something differently than it normally does, and I'm calling that directed energy.
I see.
Energy
Now,
was instructed. I'm not talking about a specific weapon. I'm talking about the destructive mechanism, the categories.
okay.
And
Now,
and so one way of covering up the evidence that I present is to say, oh, she's talking about laser beams from outer space. Well, no, laser beams, for example, would cause the destructive mechanism of thermal energy if they cook something, and I've ruled that
yes.
out. So it's that the energy was directed in some way. Like instead of atoms being attracted to each other, they're directed to repel each other.
This brings up the most secret weapon, and I hate to use the word weapon, but indeed it was a weapon, and you call it this.
It's a technology. It's a
Yeah, okay. Is the Manhattan Project? They developed the A bomb, and they tested it at White Sands. 5,000 people worked on that project for years, and not one word of it was leaked, except supposedly they say the Rosenbergs. They tested it at White Sands. Then they dropped it first on Hiroshima, and then Nagasaki, and then the world knew about it. And of course, people asked why the second bomb. The second bomb was to warn Russia, and the United States started the Cold War, because how else to bring 1.5 million men home to make toasters? You can't sell that many toasters, but you can always sell weapons. That is another story. But with this energy-directed device, which was used as a weapon, where could they develop and test this?
Well, there's a lot of places. I'm sure various countries have their own research labs too. But we had something called the Star Wars program.
Right.
That's actually their state objective, but we don't know what they're doing behind the closed doors. But how do you pull this off in broad daylight in front of the world and have so few people see what happened? And that's becomes the biggest key here is hiding this technology. They wanted to use it, but they kept it hidden from the consciousness of most people. And how they do that is people like to do groupthink. They like to join a consensus. So when you see a consensus like truth groups together, they're really being issued talking points and a list of things, and then they stop looking at evidence. And that's one of the key things. Anyone who's asking questions was then, herded into these truth groups.
And
Or
then
a consensus panel is, defines what talking points you're to recite. And then everyone just recites. And I think the same thing was probably done with JFK. People don't like...
I must tell you, Judy, there's no question about that. When I first did the Garrison tapes, which won the San Sebastian Film Festival Award, and I must say, quite honestly, it is a wonderful, brilliant, factual documentary, and it's a great story because it's a personal story, as is your story a great story because it is a personal story. I offered it to 12 of the leading assassination sites in this country, from JFK Lancer to all of them. I offered it to them 10 years ago free to put up on their sites to show all of their hundreds of thousands of subscribers this story of this wonderful man, the only guy to investigate this crime. And I must tell you, every single one of them turned me down, and a couple with very nasty letters. I must tell you, the CIA seems to be the only government outfit that knows how to do its job properly. In the 70s, the Church Committee revealed that they had 1,000 media assets, the CIA. Imagine what they have now when we're fighting fake wars in 2015.
And then most of the people following along are well-meaning people, but they just, go into groupthink, and they get controlled as part of a consensus.
This is what I'm trying to say to you. I am convinced that some of the leading advocates of a new investigation into the death of Kennedy are CIA assets.
Oh, right.
That's why nothing is being done.
Right. And think about with the parallel with 9/11. We need a new investigation. Why? Here is one. It's in my book. That is a comprehensive forensic investigation. Why are they covering it up?
I'm going to expand on that a little more. But the thing that impressed me when I looked at the holes in the ground, those holes in the ground could have only come from above.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay, tell me why not necessarily.
Now think of, just imagine in space. Ignore all of the material, whether it's in or not in this zone. Make 2 points and draw a straight line between those 2 points. Let's say something happens that causes, at a radial distance from that line between those 2 points, all the material turns to dust. It's instructed in that region to dustify. And you see that same kind of thing in some of John Hutchison's samples. And it may be in a solid piece of aluminum where there's no way you can get a drill in there. And it's just, dustifies. And it may not necessarily be, from above. That's a tempting conclusion based on, preconceived ideas of what's possible. But what you can notice is it seems like a cylindrical cutout where materials, is dustified or missing.
But these energy-directed devices had to be somewhere.
Or okay, let's look at how John Hutchison's does his stuff. He creates a static field. He used to use a Tesla coil, but later used a Van de Graaff generator. Creates a static field, and then within that static field intersects various radio frequency signals, such as microwave. And depending on the wave shape, like square wave versus sinusoidal and so forth, and the relative magnitudes and directions and whatnot, you get different effects. Sometimes he gets stuff levitating, sometimes stuff disintegrates. And he said that was pointing out about that he gets stuff that's not grounded gets affected more because it has nowhere to discharge to. And you think of the toasted cars.
Well, also there's this famous clip on the internet about, I believe, the mayor of New York talking about Building 7, which is only hit by dust and by smoke. And that's the phrase that he's saying is, well, we told the firemen to pull it, which is used as an expression in the demolition industry. But you have this great photograph in your book of the rubble of Building 7. And right
There's not
across,
much left of that.
yeah, and then right across the street is this totally unharmed U.S. Post Office. In other words, the damage from
It didn't even completely spill across the street.
It didn't, not even a rock, not a boulder, not a brick.
Yeah, you think of all the windows in a 47-story building, and if you're going to do controlled demolition, you remove all material from the building, everything that's nailed down or not nailed down, everything goes, because a Coke bottle in the windowsill becomes a projectile. like a missile. Now think of all that glass. If it goes flying, you're going to have people decapitated. You're going to have trees sliced. Didn't happen.
None
You couldn't even
of that.
find the glass.
But
Yeah, and the building across the street would have pockmarks all over it from being machine gun fired.
well, it takes us back to what we said before, that if it were real terrorists who were trying to destroy America, they would have destroyed all the surrounding buildings. And this is a conclusion, but there's no other conclusion that you can reach, that the people who designed this attack had to be out of a James Bond movie, for crying out loud. They had to be total evil geniuses in order.
And there were very few that needed to be involved. Let's say there's only one person knows what the left hand and the right hand are doing, where neither the left hand nor the right hand knows what they are doing themselves. Let's say, for example, you're doing a military exercise. It's just an exercise where you're monkeying with the magnetic field in a certain region. All right, another military group is they're supposed to fiddle around with the electrical, environment in a particular place. Neither one knows what the other one's doing.
Exactly.
And somebody else is monkeying with the gravitational field, and voila, something, this happens. So you don't need that many people to know what they're doing. If somebody running a military exercise is, just doing their job, and they have no idea of what happened. But what is clear is that this technology must be kept secret at all costs.
Well,
and so you get this cover-up team saying, for people asking questions, you say, it was thermite, or it was bombs in the building, or it was, you give somebody someplace else to go, so they quit asking questions. They quit
on the
looking at
Manhattan Project, 5,000 people were involved in it, and probably only a handful of people actually knew what they were doing. How many people would be involved in developing this kind of energy directing device?
I call it directed energy. Just energy that gets directed. But this isn't something new. This is something that's been around for a while. John Hutchison didn't develop it. He just discovered it and could reproduce it. It was patented. A part of it was patented over 100 years ago. George Pigott, who was doing levitation.
My goodness!
And that's in my book.
Yeah, I know it is. Also, there's again about like the chapter about the Hurricane Aaron was astonishing to me. There is another chapter which almost bordered on science fiction, but it's not science fiction. And I never read anything about. You always hear about the Earth's magnetic field, and you always hear that the poles are going to tip, and we're all going to fly off, and the Earth's going to. I never read any of that stuff, but I was fascinated by your chapter 19, which was the Earth's magnetic field. Why was that chapter included?
I just happened to look at it and think it's pretty strange that we had this anomalous signal that just perfectly lined up with each of the events that happened that day.
How do you mean?
For about 3 days beforehand, the signals are at 6 different stations are going along. Those are just the easiest ones to access. And then about 20 minutes before the North Tower got its hole, which was the first tower affected, they all started trending downward. And then there's a hole that happens, and then they start trending upward, and then a hole happens, and they go horizontally. And then, they start going down. That's when the South Tower went to dust, and then they really dropped off the cliff. That's when the North Tower turned to dust, and they're haywire all afternoon until Building 7, dustified, did its final demise. And then it's almost back to normal, but there's some sort of magnetic resonance that still kind of continued in there a little bit. But it's strange. All afternoon, they were haywire, and that's when Building 7 was turning to dust all afternoon.
Could this directed energy device have anything to do with the Earth's magnetic field?
Everything's, affects something else, but not necessarily the Earth. It could have been that it was recorded there.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it was picked up, but those aren't satellite mounted. These are ground mounted.
Oh,
So
I see.
it was
Oh,
sensing that something was picked up from on the magnetometers.